This is the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is not a traditional interview show. These are perspective driven conversations with founders, builders, and independent creators shaping what comes next. We go beyond headlines, beyond hype, and beyond price to explore ownership, freedom, and opportunity in the digital economy, where builders talk freedom, not price. Today's conversation is interesting to me because I don't think it's really going to be about just crypto or NFTs. I think this is a conversation about creators, financial stress, participation, and who actually gets access to emerging systems. So a lot of creators live under prolonged economic instability, and that changes how people think about risk, technology, trust, and opportunity. So today we're going to explore the interaction between creator survival, community funding, economic pressure, and the psychology surrounding participation in digital systems. My guest today is Alex Genadinik. You're gonna correct me here.
Nobody knows how to pronounce this name anyway. I do Genadinik,
Great.
but anyway is probably correct.
Thank you for joining me. So um, let's kick things off. And I'm going to ask you first, uh, what made you start, thinking about creators specifically?
Well, I've been a creator my entire professional life ever since university. I was taking some classes and they were kind of noise. And then I had my own ideas and they were much more fascinating. And because I was a computer science major, I could build them. It's like, okay, way more interesting. And then I got that bug, I was like, I'll make stuff. And in parallel, as I was doing software and building different companies and, a lot of times trying and failing, I was also very creative in terms of being artsy. I make music now. And so I've just always had that parallel thread of those kind of two lives, being nerd in one way and a nerd in a totally different way, but always creating things. And for a long time, like it's a struggle. If you get a 9 to 5 job, it's a different kind of struggle. Like maybe you're pressed for time and the job isn't easy, but you have this financial security. But if you go out and pursue your dream or, step out to any kind of risky venture, it's suddenly a free fall because there's no more paycheck. Ouch. And you always want and hope to solve that way sooner than it happens. Just because you always hope for the best case, and what happens usually the average case. So the hope versus reality just doesn't compute. And I ended up living kind of going from a software engineer salary to a no salary, where I was for some time kind of trying to make money with my little startup ventures early on. And it was like budgeting on a napkin, $100 from this source, $200 from this client, and I can make rent some months. And that lasted for a long time for me until I figured things out and I made my business grow. And that chronic stress was a profound experience. It really made an imprint on me, which is really why I wanted to build something for creators, which was my whole life, so that they can get a little bit more help in that, because it wasn't just profound for me. Later, I learned all the science of that and the trauma and the damage from the chronic stress and how it even changes your brain biologically, but it's a universal experience, that it isn't just specific to me. It's really broadly experienced.
I'm sure that during that chronic stress period, you notice certain patterns, right? What patterns did you notice that really bothered you?
The one thing, and this again is not me, science backs this, but I experienced this before I learned all the science. I just kind of Oh, it's happening to me, but when you are under extreme stress, your brain cannot focus on the long-term planning. The right thing is the hard thing long term. Can't do it. You're only able to try to relieve your short-term pain, which leads to short-term focused decisions, which leads to poor work, shortcuts, right? And actually, I I struggled longer because of the inability to step back and think, okay, what will make me stronger long term? What will make me better at my craft? Instead, at that time, I was making a lot of content, and I wasn't working on how can I improve my content. I was like, I just need to churn out more and more content, but it wasn't, per piece of content I was generating very little revenue, and it was kind of like a kind of spinning my own wheels, where I was creating content poor quality now in hindsight, but it was the only thing I can do to kind of inch up, rather than if I had taken a step back, thought, how can I get better? Maybe got some coaching, maybe took some more intelligent steps, more long-term thinking steps, I could have solved my own problem better. But it was, in hindsight, I can see it, but I also see how it just, there was no help also. Like, there was nobody to give me that magical advice.
Um, you mentioned in when you first reached out to me, you said that creators often reject crypto because they cannot afford to participate in risk systems. What do you mean by that, and why the contrary in viewed for what I've heard otherwise?
So I think we should make some distinctions. The creators who are into NFTs, they are like 1% of creators who are very early adopters. So of course they'd be into it because they are the early adopters. But if you talk about creators in like a person who's writing a novel on their piece of paper, pen and paper, or on their laptop, but they're not in crypto, right? They're just not native in that universe. For them, it's really hard to get into it, because probably if they are writing their own novel, they're likely financially struggling, because most people don't have a book deal. And if you don't have a book deal, you're probably investing your time and effort into a later payout, meaning you're not getting paid now, unless you have like a part-time job, which if you do have a job, it relieves some stress, but it only leaves you like weekends and evenings to write, which is when you're tired, when it's not optimal. So your best time is given to your job, not your creative work. So, but if people sacrifice and risk, then they're really living on a financial free fall. And so they don't really have the extra money to go, hey, I'll experiment with crypto, risky investments, right? They're the furthest thing from that. And when I leave the nerdy online world where everybody seems to be up on crypto and AI and that whole universe, it seems to be like everybody's into it. When I turn the computer off and go to like offline, like writing workshops or music workshops, I haven't met a person yet who's like really into crypto. Some people can tolerate it, but most people are like really averse. They see it as a scam, and it's just a different population, right? Because the NFT crowd, we call them creators, but we should kind of decouple the different creators. Like in the past, creators were more like traditional artists, musicians, actual artists, sketch, actual art, which in my case would be like stick figures, but better than that, or writers. That would be that was the definition of creators, right? In the online world, now we have YouTubers are creators and streamers are creators. So that definition got very conflated. And of course, these people are a lot more entrepreneurial in the online sense. They're more native to it, and the step towards crypto is a more natural step. But even so, a lot of the online entrepreneurs, they're not everybody's into crypto, right? So it's a subset of a subset of creators that were ideal for NFTs. But NFT, like we chatted a little earlier, a lot of NFT was like 2% art, 98% crypto. So it was really coming, everybody who was, if you define the word art, and if you were a little bit strict about how you call whom you call creator, the actual artsy musicians and artists and authors would not call the kitty NFTs. Remember those? I forget the exact name, but yeah, and all the other ones, they would not call that art. Um, they would laugh at it. So a lot of the NFT creators, they're not really creators.
God. But then they say if the real creators are struggling financially, the novelists, that's going to impact the quality of the novel, isn't it?
For sure. Because, well, table that, maybe, and likely, because you are quite a bit pressured. Now, some people do amazing work when they are pressured, because if you have to be homeless next week, you will really, really, really work so much harder than you would otherwise. Because fear is people don't like to talk about it, but it's an incredibly strong motivator. So if you are really struggling and the alternative is even worse financial situation, and the way out is the book or is launching of whatever you're creating, it will get you to focus. Now, the quality of the work, yeah, maybe full of shortcuts, maybe not as exquisite as you would wish, but it would certainly have those trade-offs, but at least it would more rapidly get created and launched. So there are some trade-offs, but yeah, you're right. A lot of quality suffers.
Got it. So has the creator economy, like, I guess has it improved creator stability or um, fragmentation? Has it created fragmentation?
I think the fragmentation is probably the right view, because there are some people who are the slow adapters, who they still live in that universe of 1990s or 80s or before, where, like, take authors for example, or musicians, they don't understand the gift that they've been given with free publishing, right? Like self-publishing, whether it's a book on Amazon, biggest bookstore in the world. You would, in the 90s, that was, Barnes and Noble or whatever, you would beg for that. Right here, it's available to you, and they still don't like think of it as first step. They're like, oh, I'm going to get a book deal. They live in that universe from 30 or 40 years ago. Same with musicians. They need a record deal. No, not really. Maybe, right? um and so a lot of people just haven't taken that step. Now, why? There may be multiple reasons for different people why they don't venture into this new world. I guess that's just human nature. Some people adapt sooner than later, and some people never. But when I turn the computer off and when I go into actual, like, real world, actual artsy communities, of very grassroots one, not of like necessarily successful creators, although successful creators very often are the very few that get deals. Then they go out and brag, oh, my publisher, and everybody's like, ooh, publisher. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, why in the universe would you give 30% to a book agent, sorry, 15% to a book agent, 15% to a publisher, where Amazon is right here, just like it's faster even, right? But I learned to be quiet, because it's usually me who's one against like the many in that group. So I'm quiet, but I'm personally, like, I over 10 years ago, I've written some books that have had commercial success and have been used at some universities, which I didn't think that was ever going to happen. The universities found me on Amazon without me reaching out to them. So I'm very pro self-published. Like, I'm like, wow, it's a gift, because I don't think in the gatekeeper world of publisher I would ever gotten accepted. So I'm like, wow, it's an amazing gift. But some people just don't. So definitely it's fragmented. But very surprising to me, the fragmentation seems skewed, and that most creators are still in that old world thinking.
Got it. So let's take a piece of that fragmented population and talk about the ones who are online and on Amazon and now building their hopefully, notice people notice their books through social platforms. Okay. How much of the modern creativity is now focused on performance metrics for those creators than before?
Do you mean in terms of when they're self-publishing or
Yeah. So I'm wondering if those creators are becoming, less creators and more algorithmic labor for
I
the
think
for the,
so. It is definitely that because, well, it really depends on how strictly, again, you define art. When you go um, on TV today, they call just about anybody artist, right? But then you look at it and like, wow, this is really horrible quality. I would not actually call this art. I could have tweeted that same, the lyrics of that song reads more like a Twitter than a beautiful artsy poetry. Right? So there's definitely um, when I was learning about art, I'm not seeing that in the online arts, not even in the strict definition, but in any form almost. I see like poetry and I look at poetry and I'm like, well, this really just could have been Twitter post. Like, I don't see any imagination, metaphor, simile, imagery, like, anything that has to, like, you would, things that go into defining a poem or whatever, right? And also broader works, larger works. So there's obviously different taste is subjective. But yeah, certainly online, you don't survive unless you're growing. And if your audience likes what we might call some kind of a more base content, um, like there's a woman I know, I won't say anything, but her poetry is just all sexual, like all sex. It's totally fine. The topic never matters, but there's a certain audience that is like, ooh, cool, right? But if that same quality of poetry was about flowers or something, whatever, something benign that doesn't really get attention, something a little more boring, that audience wouldn't be there, right? So you kind of have to almost pander, but create content that audiences want, and online audiences, they really only seem to want a few verticals of topics. Also, if you're any kind of political, you'll get, it's hard to say, but you'll be, you know, immediately more, you'll get a lot more attention because we live in a kind of a political age. Whereas if you try to write about, here's what's true beauty, like zero viewers, zero, or some politician sucks or is good. Uh, those, the names of politicians today, they're very emotionally evoking. And so, of course, the audience will look at that, click on that. And so I think creators, any creators, from many podcasters to artists, are focused to go where the demand is, kind of.
Got it. So you're saying a point that creator stops being a creator and becomes a financial operator managing expectations is the point where they have to pander, and they usually have to pander about politics and sex.
Or other topics that get a lot of attention, which you can't blame people because everybody has to make enough revenue to pay rent. Like without that, it's a feeling of desperation, like we talked about, and then it's just like, how do I solve the rent problem? And it's very human nature. I mean, people ranging from top CEOs do this, right? Like, how do I make enough money so that my company can, have a good balance sheet next quarter or something, right? So it's a challenge that's like a much broader challenge of like, how do I make enough money for certain goals next, and then I got to do whatever I got to do to get there.
Got it. So you are working to help creators with funding, right? So
Yes.
what problems are you actually trying to solve, and where do traditional funding systems completely fail creators?
So traditional funding systems for artists tend to be websites like GoFundMe, or the most popular one is Patreon. The Patreon is great at the moment, but when I looked a little deeper into it, I was like, huh, they take from 5 to 12% commission depending on certain pricing levels. And when I looked deeper in cryptocurrency, I'm like, wow, okay, the great hedge against the dollar is the deflationary nature of a lot of cryptocurrencies, which is another 3 to 5% on the dollar, closer to 5%, despite what the government says. When I did the calculation with ChatGPT, it was closer to 5. Government says 3. Let's settle on 4, whatever. So if you couple the fees of Patreon, the loss of value by raising money with dollars and holding dollars, and on the flip side of that, you can add benefits of like actual financial real benefits of cryptocurrency, like staking rewards, airdrops, and other like real potential benefits. I calculated a turnaround of 15 to 25% on every dollar that people get raised, right? Once you add all those factors. And I thought, oh, that's incredibly compelling. Especially, I thought it wasn't good to take money in commission fees from creators. If you're Patreon, you have to pay rent, I understand, but you're also taking money from mostly not the wealthiest. So I tried my best to create a financial system, with the token, the SPRK token, that really fights for the creator. And the problem I tried to solve is the problem that I faced. What I hoped was months, but turned out to be years of chronic financial stress. Because to this day, even though maybe I've turned into like a crusty old man, in my old age, but I still, when somebody's telling me about how much they're struggling or like they're trying so hard, it's not working, and they're kind of early in their journey, like my heart like opens up to them, like in a natural way. I really feel a ton of empathy because I go back 20 years or maybe 15, I don't know, depends how you count, but I go back too many years, a lot of years. And I still see myself, back then, like struggling, just trying to make YouTube videos at that time or whatever, and try just getting by. And I'm kind of always transported to that time in my life, and I try to solve that for whoever kind of I have these conversations with. Not always successfully. I can't help everybody, and there's only so much you can do. But that's really why, at the heart of it, I created this, and to a smaller degree, I did want to do something to support creators because, like we talked about earlier in our conversation, like it's all I've been doing my whole life is like creating this, creating that, living in a world that's a product of my own curiosity, which I think has been really invaluable to me. Like it's been a fascinating journey, but it's totally hard because you're going to pay for that out of your own pocket and with your own struggle, which maybe is good because you kind of have to go through some challenges to become more resilient. Because if everything was so easy, just then I don't know, like some things have to be hard to feel valuable, or I don't know what the right way to phrase it is, but you kind of have to get that resilience muscle at some point in your journey. So can't solve every problem, but certainly I think if you help people get through the financial stress, and if trauma is a like highfalutin kind of fancy term, but it is close to that. The chronic stress over years that a lot of creators, and some creators never solve that. They keep struggling, and if I can help people expedite that process, then I think it's a fantastic project. Because it shouldn't be like, how can I make money? I think at some point I was like, what kind of a nice thing can I do in the world?
Got it. So I think you phrased it pretty well. But I'm drawing as you're speaking, I draw a parallel here. I'm looking at financial startups and their relationships to VCs, and I'm comparing that to creators and their relationships to donors, right? Do donors subconsciously behave just like VCs, even if legally they're not?
It's a hard question because I haven't quite crossed that bridge in this project, right? Because one of the features of this project is that if a creator attains some financial success from a funded project, they're able to redistribute some of the funds as a volunteer decision. Like, hey, thank you for helping me succeed. Here's 10% of everything I made, totally trust based. I made X amount, here's 10% to the original donors. So it's a unique feature that I built, which you're right to I think brainstorm here in that because it's unique, there really isn't a lot of precedence to it, not just in my project, but in general. Um, I'll tell you some things that we've emailed about it and I've thought about it. Well, certainly most projects fail anyway. So some expectations have to be set. I think most businesses fail and there are no immediate statistics of it just because it's impossible to track. But most artistic projects, I think, fail at an even higher rate because it's just so hard to make money from artistic projects. Like if you want to be a musician, great, but it's for losing money, not making money. For most, like most people lose money, right? So there's some expectation on the part of the donor because a lot of the donors they are friends and family. They're not looking to make money necessarily. Their friends and family just want to support. Their fans who just want to support. So that's the angle that I think is closer to reality here because I will be very careful to say, hey, it's possible to from you started as a donor, but you might actually make some money as a profit or at least get some money back if it's not everything. It's an interesting, unique feature, but it's not the goal. And I'm going to, in my messaging, be very careful because I think people are going to be disappointed and wait long and hard if they want a return on their investment. Um, because, being a creator myself in business ventures and in artsy ventures, it almost never makes money, any money, like forget profit. Uh, and even business ventures now, even though I have some experience and some success under my belt, I know that ego aside, if I start 10 projects in the future, even with experience and knowledge and et cetera, nine of them probably will fail. It's just the nature of a lot of things aren't even up to me. There's economic cycles, there's competition, there's ever changing, today something's popular, the next day AI killed it. So it's so hard to succeed that I wouldn't make the culture of this project that I'm building and this token that donors should feel like they're investors. Now everything I said may fall on deaf ears, which is a real challenge. I think, but at the same time, even investors, they might ask, "Hey, how is my project going?" "Oh, it failed." "All right." Well, what else can I do? So I think there is a natural dead end to projects that just don't make money.
Got it. So I'm looking at the traditional financial route. I'm looking at the Patreon. I'm looking at GoFundMe, and I'm looking at your cryptocurrency project. And I'm just wondering if you're recreating the same exclusion patterns that technology claimed to solve, or not.
Partially, right? Because when I tell like the offline, artsy people, the non NFT, the exact opposite of them, when I tell them, hey, I've got a crypto project, they hate crypto, right? So yeah, it's not for them. And I've learned that very quickly. So the right audience for my project are more tech savvy who are already interested in raising money through Patreon, already interested in a few factors. Maybe they're open to crypto, maybe they just need funding and they know that the traditional route of, agent and publisher isn't the way for them, but they still want to raise money somehow, and they're open to ideas. Some of them are maybe open to cryptocurrency because they're probably a little bit more tech savvy already. So that's my audience, people who are already a little tech savvy, already open to raising money with donations, already looking for maybe Patreon alternatives, which there are plenty of people who are searching that. Like even on Google keyword tool, like that search is not a small search. I mean, it's not giant, but it's significant enough. So I've just got to thread the needle. The way this usually works, and I've experienced this myself in other industries, because I've succeeded as an online course creator on Udemy. And when I started on Udemy, people were like, why would I make a course on this? It seems a little strange. And then somebody's like, yeah, here I am making $10,000 a month. And then nobody ever asked that question again. Why would you make a course? Everybody is making courses. And that case study is what I'm hoping to create. So at the moment, I'm looking for a small group of people that I can aid to raise money through my project. They would go post their project on sprktoken.com, have it be live there. I can promote it, not infinitely, but to some degree. And hopefully we can raise money, which I can then post as a case study. Hey, this thing works. Not only it works, we raised X, and this person got X and 110% of X, right? Because they didn't lose money through inflation and fees, but got extra rewards through staking and other crypto mechanisms like airdrops and etc. So, oh wow, it would have been 85% of the total money that they would keep with Patreon, but here instead of 85%, they keep 110.
Let's step back from the cryptocurrency aspect of blockchain itself and talk about the decentralized system altogether, right? So, can decentralized systems remain decentralized? If you mentioned earlier resiliency, if participation is only concentrated among financially resilient people.
Well, this particular project never was meant to be 100% decentralized in the pure sense, because somebody has to be there to manage it. Like you have to manage the token reserve. There has to be a team, right? Like if you create a totally fresh token, there's like that you got to, on day one you have to create tokenomics, right? Who's gonna, like let's say there's X number of tokens outstanding. There's a founding team that gets certain tokens. There's certain number of tokens go towards marketing. It's pretty standard in the tokenomics world. So there's a lot of people who hold a lot, and certainly it's centralized in that sense, right? There's the initial founding team that's centralized. In this particular project, it's not purely decentralized. The hope is that over time, the founding team can take a step back and the project can just roll on its own once it's a household name. But the journey from this moment to then is so long that is, I have made peace with the idea that it's not going to live up to the decentralization promise, that pure promise of decentralization. It's not something that's in the perfect world it would be, but somebody has to push it up and make it a thing and make it work.
So basically, the centralized systems increasingly don't offer decentralization at all.
Hopefully in the future, like it's not something that I'm saying like no, never, but in practice, there's so much work that the founders have to do. Like if you look at Ethereum, where would it be without the founder, right? I think it had to become, it had, in the very, very early days, I don't know the entire history, but he had to push it, right? Vitalik, he was like kind of almost synonymous with Ethereum. and he was a large part of the growth. So it also depends how you define, pure decentralization. Like if you just look at the tokenomics, it can live on its own. The founder doesn't have to intervene. But in the real world, the founder has to do so much of the initial pushing of the project that I think, if I was being transparent, I think there is some, centralization here.
So basically, if downside risk becomes unbearable for financially stressed populations, they effectively become locked out of technological innovation.
Well, not due to the decentralization, but I think due to it's hard for them to adopt cryptocurrency, right? Because if you have money to risk and invest, like a typical professional, right? I'll allocate some for my 401k, some little bit of risky investments, and here comes crypto. Perfect. Okay, you can play around with crypto and you can get your feet wet and get up to speed. But if you're an artist and you're in financial struggle, you literally can't put extra money. I mean, you can put like $100, $10, but it's so not worth your while to dabble. Okay, I'll triple my $100 in the great case, right? And it's not going to make a difference. So people are like, well, what's the point? And they just don't. And so they miss that little opportunity, which leads them to miss the second, third, and fourth, and 10th, and 20th opportunity. And I found that to be the case for me, because this is the saddest part of my own crypto journey. I heard about cryptocurrency, about Bitcoin, when it was way below $1. Like, I don't remember the exact amount, but it was something ridiculous. And I remember I was walking, I was like, I should look into this. And then that was my period of like a lot of struggle. And I was so just in that relief stress, make my current thing work. I just couldn't devote time and energy and mental energy to another project, no matter how little it was. It's not like I had to build Bitcoin. It was already there. I just had to buy it. But I didn't. And then I bought it a lot later and I was like, what if I? So, I've been there myself. A lot of the things that I'm trying to help people with, it's like I kind of see myself. Oh, I've been there. I felt that. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. You have to be in early. So, I wasn't either, but yeah. So I want to find out, what about your project? What worries you the most from a social perspective about your model?
I think it's that reluctance of artists to work with cryptocurrency, because the very reason I made it, so it can be for artists, is the very reason that the biggest problems can come from, because just so many of the people who are artsy, they're not even open-minded. It's one thing if somebody's open-minded and you can explain, well, here's the math of it. That would be great. But what I'm finding is the resistance is just toddler level, where it's like, no, I'm not eating that, and there's nothing you can do to make me eat that food. Right? And then it might be that if they try, they love it, but they're not trying it. And that's the resistance that I see. So in the best case, I will have an incredibly hard time and slow adoption curve. I don't need a rapid adoption curve because it's a relatively small project. It's not meant to be a gigantic project. And I'm currently just looking at finding that perfect audience that I mentioned, rather than the traditional artists. Hopefully, long term, once the math is there and once the case studies are there, it will be self-evident. Like, oh, why didn't I do cryptocurrency all this time? Right? When people see examples of how it works. So, but to get there, the journey is hard, and it will come from the very nature of the people that I'm trying to help, is that there's in this community, there's just a big reluctance, more so than in other communities.
So you have challenges. You also have optimism, right? Or you wouldn't be doing this. So what makes you optimistic that you will be successful?
That's a good question. Most projects fail, so I may appear optimistic. Well, I love this project because, one, is I know that I'm doing something that's, a benevolent business. I've always done benevolent businesses. Like I've never been a person who's like, here's some cash. I'm just gonna go and grab it, and I don't care what other people, if it hurts them, or like it's never. I see it online all the time. Just go to YouTube and everybody's selling something that's not really honest or great or whatever. Right? You're always one step away from a scam online, but it's just never been interesting for me. I always felt like if you help people, you'll come out of it better in the other, on the other end. It's not a fairy tale like that in the end. It's not always like that, but especially because I resonate historically, like my own experience is precisely the kind of person I'm trying to help. I kind of see like, hey, earlier me, like if you had only gotten help, your life would have been so much easier. And that gives me a lot of hope because the earlier me really could have used the hope, and there's a lot of earlier me's all the time, and I really love it for that. Because in my current work, selling on, creating and selling online courses, it's also been very rewarding because a lot of people come to me and they're like, you don't know me, but I took your class 5 years ago and now I made six figures with this. And I'm like, that's unbelievable. And that's rewarding. But I feel like something about it is even a little bit more invested from me personally. And so that really gets me excited to work on it and think creatively. Like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing to try? What's the next thing to try? Okay, the first 20 things didn't work. What's the 21st thing? That is exciting.
WD-40, they took 40 tries to get it right.
Oh my God,
So,
yes. It's a story of my life, I wish it's like that bell curve, where you wish you were like the 99th percentile, the best case happened to you, but you're really always mostly in the middle. And that difference of like where you were wishing, what you were wishing would happen, but what actually happened, story of my life.
what kind of society do we become when creativity itself increasingly depends on financial survivability inside algorithmic systems?